In the words of Jim Holt, German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once said,
Those who don't wonder about the contingency of their existence, of the contingency of the world's existence, are mentally deficient.
And since this follow-up video is made to address our thought process, it's only right that we follow up with an explanation of what exactly Schopenhauer meant, and how we've come to interpret his words. Firstly, on reflection, I found that the word contingency is the most problematic part of that whole phrase. The Oxford Dictionary Lexico lists 4 definitions for the word. As such, it can be said that Schopenhauer's passage can be understood at more than one level. Those definitions are: a provision for a possible event or circumstance, an incidental expense, the absence of certainty in events, the absence of necessity, the fact of being so without having to be so. Generally speaking, contingency is a word used to articulate chance, accidents, the lack of certainty, possibilities, likelihoods, and so forth. And given the context in which Schopenhauer's passage occurs, Schopenhauer's renowned pessimism, and the reasoning pattern followed in the world as will and representation from which the passage was extracted, we can say that of the 4 definitions, the last seems the most consistent. In fact, the last definition is the one widely used in philosophy, and is essentially a philosophical extrapolation of the expression.
Our universe is just one of a vast number of universes, all with very different physical properties. And our universe is just one lucky draw from the hat, in which case we are accidental. We are an accidental universe.
And from that position, it is not really what the quote seems to address that we should find interesting. That is, that we need to think about and ponder over the fact that the world exists, but rather the connotations of the word contingency, and which modifies the sentence into presupposing that the world is simply the work of chance and wasn't really intended to exist, and that the world exists not necessarily, but accidentally. And when we deconstruct the passage in that manner, we come face to face with the passage hidden within the passage, so to speak. Those who don't wonder about the meaninglessness of their existence and of the world's existence are mentally deficient. When we come across phrases of this sort, we should really be cautious, and rather than accepting the apparent verdict of the phrase, we should follow the Socratic method of asking the person to clarify their position. That would in turn expose the foundations on which the final verdict was based. However, accepting a statement like that without much thought only means that we've simply let the person behind the phrase do the thinking for us. Aristotle, the father of science for over a millennia before we replaced him with Galileo, was possibly history's greatest skeptic, but his skepticism was different from that of Galileo or Schopenhauer's. Unlike the latter, he approached the world from a place of admiration and wonder about the complex and captivating arrangements, as he put it, of the world, stating in the Metaphysics, "By nature, all men long to know, an indication in their delight in the senses. For these, quite apart from their utility, are intrinsically delightful." Aristotle based his scientific inquiries on that sense of wonder and marvel, which he inherited from Plato and Socrates. On the other hand, many Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment thinkers, particularly those of the 16th, the 17th, and 18th century, like Hume, Kant, Schopenhauer, and Descartes, approached it from a position of doubt. And that doubt, at the time vituperated as impiety by the religious class, was based on the belief that there is a certain contingency and fogginess and aimlessness that has us short of appreciating the beauty and wonder which, as Aristotle put it, is the reason men both now and originally began to philosophize. And philosophy here, as we've discovered in the last video, is used in the same sense that we use science today. This is where the clash between science and religion originated. Religion became erroneously conflated with philosophy, or vice versa, making it easier to paint the whole tradition as superstitious, the way the church painted the skeptists that sparked the Enlightenment era as impious. The clash is really between those who believe in the contingency of life and those who believe in its necessity.
18 years, I felt His presence in my mind as I prayed. I got goosebumps as I was in communion with what I thought was the Holy Spirit of God. As I read the Holy Bible and read about the resurrection of Jesus, I dedicated my life to preaching that gospel that I thought was so real, that gave so much meaning, so much hope, so much beauty to the world. But I've changed my mind. I now know I was deluded. I was having a very real, very powerful, but mental experience that happens.
Because what we've learned is that we are more insignificant than we ever could have imagined. You could get rid of us and all the galaxies and everything we see in the universe, and it would be largely the same.
One thing to say is that the universe doesn't owe us any meaning. It could be that there is no meaning of life.
And that is really the quiet war that's been shaping up in the background. A war that becomes the clamorous and brutal thing that it is, as one unveils the nuances of the vocabulary implemented by both sides. And those of us who believe that this sparring is merely intellectual and takes its only shape in the two-dimensional world of papers and has no real or intrinsic effects on our way of life are greatly mistaken. Somehow we already know that, don't we? But can we really say that we know something if we're having to be reminded of it? Steve Jobs was once quoted saying, "Technology alone isn't enough, and that it requires art and humanities." A few decades prior, physicist Erwin Schrödinger said something that sounds almost like a tautology. Eliminating metaphysics would mean taking the soul out of both science and arts. When we accept that science is an inquiry into that which we don't yet know, don't we do so on the basis that there is something to be derived from the unknown? That we are reaching for something higher than the plane on which we currently stand? Or to put it differently, are we not certain that there are things out there that are to be discovered? If the idea that life is meaningless isn't the premature observation that it clearly is, what is it then that drives our scientific ambitions? If it's not meaning that we're so industriously trying to find, then what is it all for? Ambition, I guess, is the word. A word whose Latin origin I found to be less attractive than the version of it that we're so used to hearing, and which goes, striving for favor, desire for honor, or thirst for power. So if it's not a sense of wonder, as in Aristotle's case, in that we clearly find our own existence so amazing and exceptional a fact that it drove us to innovate, research, and explore, what else could we attribute all this effort to? And this is another question that pops up in Aristotle's Metaphysics, and to which he answers, all men began to philosophize from wonder, whether it's really so, as with spontaneous natural wonders, such as those of the changes of the sun, or the incommensurability of the diameter, for everybody thinks that this is amazing, if it cannot be measured exactly, for a geometer would be surprised by nothing so much as if a diameter were measurable. Can contingency alone account for all the amazing things which we've come to do? The amazing history that we've built? This question brought to my mind a line from Giordano Bruno's 1584 Cause, Principle, and Unity, which we could in some way blame for Schopenhauer's pessimism. We can assert with certainty that the universe is all center, and that the center of the universe is everywhere, and the circumference is nowhere. Words he wrote triumphantly. This declaration, coming from one of the most significant figures of the Renaissance, changed everything. It changed the then common perception of the universe, which had remained unchanged since the Hellenics ruled the known world. As Borges explained it in a short essay titled The Fearful Sphere of Pascal, men felt lost in time and space as a result of Bruno's declaration, which implied that if the future and the past are infinite, there can never really be a when. And as far as space, If we're as far away from the infinite as we are from the infinitesimal, there can never really be a where. No one exists on a certain day, or in a certain place. No one knows the size of his own face. And since order was removed from the cosmos, why should we think that there is any down here? Was perhaps Schopenhauer's impression. If the heavens are orderless and ungoverned, why should we think that Earth is? Isn't it the case that as above, so below? A popular phrase that has its origin in the ancient Hermetic tradition, otherwise known as Hermeticism, derived from the Hermetic corpus, the same tradition that sparked the Renaissance, and from which Giordano Bruno, by the way, borrowed his passage, word for word. A frustrated Pascal later reiterated the same words. Nature is a fearful sphere, whose center is everywhere, and whose circumference is nowhere. We can thus say that Bruno's passage parallels, in a scary way, those of Schopenhauer, and makes us wonder, had Giordano Bruno died before writing that passage, would Schopenhauer have been any less pessimistic? Would he have been motivated to start transcribing his pessimism into words? And would Nietzsche, who was influenced by Schopenhauer, have written the famous passage, "God is dead"?